Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Cassie Bradley. I am the creative director of the Impact Lounge, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you to today's programming, made possible by our incredible friends at Doris Duke Foundation. Please give them a huge round of applause. Woo! Yay! Today, we are going to discuss how storytelling expands health innovation, and how we're going to talk about how narrative can help complex health issues make them more accessible, more relatable, and more achievable. And the Impact Lounge is a traveling hub where change makers meet creators. It's a space where visionaries, storytellers, and activists converge to harness the power of narrative and film to drive positive social change. And what better way to illustrate this than the incredible conversations we have for you today. So, without further ado, I will let our incredible panel kick us off.
Hello. How many of you were at Aspen Health? Okay. How many of you are here for Aspen Ideas? How many of you are like, no, this is my only panel that I will go to this week. Yay. I love that we have such a mix. That's so great. Because I was like, I wasn't sure what the vibe was going to be in here. Well, the vibe is definitely cozy. And we might have to hand out smoking jackets very soon and get cigars out, right? I should introduce myself. I'm Manoush Zamarodi. I host NPR's TED Radio Hour. This is my first Aspen Health. I've been to Ideas before, but I think I was invited to Health because I just put out a book. It's called Body Electric, and it's based on a clinical trial with 20,000 of my listeners that we did. I know, it's great. That's my jam, is getting people, they have questions about their behavior. They maybe don't understand the science, or maybe their research hasn't been done yet. And I really think that the public is really excited to be part of finding answers to a lot of science. So I've been doing these big public citizen engagement projects for the last 10 years, mostly about tech and health. But just that's a short way of saying that I love stories and tech and bringing it into people's lives who think maybe they're not interested in science, or they don't like science, or it's not for them. These are people who are going to say, no, there are ways of getting everyone excited about science and health. And so that's what we're talking about here. How storytelling expands health innovation. How can we use narrative to make complicated medical ideas into relatable, interesting, accessible, actionable stories? Because by one estimate, I don't actually know the source of this, but it was in the materials that they gave me. By one estimate, 80% of someone's health is dependent on their circumstances, meaning, okay, it's true. Meaning where they live, what sort of access to healthcare they have, their social circumstances as well, their environment, is it polluted, is it not polluted, walkable, all those things. So how do we improve not just the doctor experience or the actual medical intervention, but all the other things that surround people outside of the doctor's office? So this area of research is called health solutions science. It is the focus of the Doris Duke Foundation. It is why we are here. They want the public to understand all of the things that affect their health through stories. So let's get to it. The panelists are all doing this work in various capacities. I feel like this is the sexy panel because we're going to go behind the scenes in Hollywood, maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. Okay. They're like, yeah. Let's start. Okay, so I'm going to go down the line. Please introduce yourself, or I'll introduce you, and then tell us your sort of relationship to this topic. So Kate, do you mind starting? You are a program director at Hollywood Health and Society at USC's Annenberg Norman Lear Center.
That's right. And I don't know, can you all hear me? Yeah. Yes, so happy to be here. I've been involved with the Impact Lounge in the past at Sundance and other places, so happy to be here. My first time in Aspen, unbelievable. Even though I went to University of Denver 100,000 years ago, never made it to Aspen. Anyway, yes, so at the Norman Lear Center, we are a nonprofit. We're based at USC, Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. And we study and help shape the impact that media, entertainment, and storytelling has on audiences, on their knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. We were started in 2001, so we're a quarter century old now, but with a grant not only from Norman Lear, a lovely, generous gift from Norman Lear, and if the young people in the room, if you don't know who Norman Lear was, look him up. But also from a grant from the CDC. that understood that public health, and of course this is going back 25
Yeah, how
years
quaint.
now, they understood that public health information can be disseminated through entertainment and that audiences actually pay attention and it can really affect lives. And we've seen that over the years, and I'll get into more of that
you're
later.
going to share some data with
Yeah,
us too
sure.
that you're bringing. Okay, great. Andrea, hello.
Hello.
We've been following each other around all week. You speak for the patients. Tell us about the work that you do at the Light Collective.
So, first time at Aspen Health. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Andrea Downing. I am the co-founder and board president of a patient-led organization called the Light Collective. Our guiding principle is no aggregation without representation. And our founding story was all around.
Meaning you can't take our data unless you talk to us as well.
Right, representation and seeing ourselves represented not only in the stories about science, but shaping the narrative in a way that gives us agency is really important. So, the origin story, I'll just make it really quick, is I started as a BRCA1 mutation carrier, otherwise known as a previvor, back when people didn't understand the science, and I was advocating for the good type of science when that gives you an incredibly high risk of breast and ovarian cancer. If anybody has ever heard Angelina Jolie's story, sometimes it's called the Angelina Jolie gene. And I shifted my focus to hacking. And becoming a hacker for good after Cambridge Analytica in 2018, because we were organizing our communities, our Facebook groups of patients who are vulnerable. And we started seeing them getting targeted with misinformation. So the better part of the last 8 years has been studying cybersecurity, locking arms with some of the most incredible leaders in healthcare cybersecurity in the country, and doing my own security research and publishing it. So that's where we are.
Okay, Cindy, we just met. Lovely to meet you again here on the panel. Cindy Escobar Alvarez, you are from the Doris Duke Foundation. Tell us about the work that you're doing.
Sure. And let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I am a scientist. So
Can you hear Cindy?
Can you hear me? I spent a lot of time at Sloan Kettering as a graduate student trying to understand how cancer cells grow. And I think cures are so important. And as you mentioned, as I have worked in philanthropy, and I spend a lot of my time trying to convince people that supporting science is worthwhile and very important. And yes, we need more stories and storytellers and scientists. We also need to be better storytellers. As you said earlier, a lot of what determines our health is not that encounter with a doctor, right? Like that's just a small part of our life that hopefully is just a moment when we are ill. And so I had the realization, right, that, well, we could apply this same method, this same rigor to creating health. And there are ways to apply science to that. And as a country, we don't support that as much. And so that's what brings me here today.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Jessica Rivera, you have been on multiple panels already today. Thank you for joining us here, and tell everybody about Good Solutions.
Hi, I am almost Dr. Jessica Rivera. I'm about a year shy of that. I am an infectious disease epidemiologist by training and science communicator, and I am the executive director for the Infodemiology Initiative at the Public Good Projects, which is a very long title to describe an organization that works on creating infodemic resilience, so basically preparedness for harmful, dangerous information as a tool to basically make people make better informed health decisions for themselves. And my touch point to this is actually very interesting. When I got this invitation, it immediately reminded me of two very cool projects that I had because of my proximity to film as a USC grad, as an undergrad. I consulted on the movie Contagion back when I was in grad school the first time, and most recently on Grey's Anatomy on a heat dome episode. But both of those projects had social impact campaigns that we can talk about later, where we actually polled people and did these really cool interventions to see what did that type of infusion of science into storytelling for large media have, what kind of impact did it have on public perception and opinion.
Great, I can't wait to hear more about that. And last but not least, Dr. Jeremy Faust, you are an ER doctor and also editor-in-chief at MedPage Today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I see patients about half the time. The rest of the time, I'm doing writing a lot of research as well in population epidemiology. But MedPage in particular brought me to doing a lot of unpacking of what's been going on TV lately on the pit. So we did a lot of content around that, and it's really, I'm excited to dive into this because it actually really changed the way I'm interfacing with people on some of these topics.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. I can't
Also,
wait
I
to
have a
read that.
Substack called Inside Medicine.
Perfect. Yeah, so I neglected to mention, we're going to use the pit as our case study today. Any fans here watch the pit? Okay, great. This is great. So let's run a trailer so we get in the mood.
Morning, Jack. You got the med students and new interns starting today. Lucky me. This is the job that keeps on giving. Ulcers. Suicidal tendencies. And nightmares.
Take the fucking nail out of my heart! Stats at 94. Give me a second.
Until you rest?
Down to 89. Wait, I've got it. Stats coming up. We got skills!
That was baptism by fire.
That was more like baptism by blood.
Being here means no matter how good you are or how hard you try, someone might die. That's called being an emergency medicine doctor. Welcome to the pit. Let's go save some lives.
So relaxing, right? Yeah. Oh my God. Is that what it's like, Jeremy? Can we start?
It's a documentary.
But seriously, let's start with you. Is there something different about the pit in terms of how it compares to other medical dramas? Because boy, was I a fan of ER in my 20s. Not as, I mean, he's a good-looking guy, Noah, but like not as many hunkies like in ER. That was the big selling point, at least to start. Talk to us.
What was the question?
The question was, you got swept away by George Clooney in your mind. How is it
Eric
different?
LaSalle fans in the house?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. R.I.P. How does it compare to other medical dramas and other sort of, and not just television, but other movies, etc.?
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone in my family who happens to be an Oscar award-winning producer many years ago, and I said, what would be really cool would be if the medical shows were accurate, because what would happen would be people like me would have word on the street, and it's legit. And as brilliant as she is, she said nobody cares, and every other show until the pit proves that right. To some extent, right? There are just things on every show that are just like science fiction and crazy, but this show I think really did decide to take that effort, and they have 7 ER doctors paired with writers. They have producers who are ER docs and other consultants, and we can tell the difference. So that's one big piece. So I don't lose my suspension of disbelief as a viewer because they're doing things that are just completely wrong. So that's great as a viewer. The other thing that I think matters so much is they are so unafraid to actually look under the hood on some of the issues that aren't necessarily flashy. Things like access to healthcare, or how absolutely insane it is that patients think as economists in their moment of need. And I just think that has opened up a whole conversation that is much needed.
The whole person is what they're looking at. Yeah. Kate, your organization has been digging into the data about how audiences respond. And like, I keep thinking, everybody loves a medical mystery, but what you're talking about is people actually seeing themselves in the story. Like, oh, that's just like me. My premiums have also gone up. Doesn't sound sexy, but when you see yourself on the screen, that's really impactful. Tell us about what you've learned.
Yeah, just to back up a little bit, so our organization consults with the writers of The Pit on pretty much every episode. We're in the writer's room. We bring in additional experts when the docs that are on the writing team and on set, they can't know everything. So they'll contact us and we connect them with lots of different experts to ensure accuracy around all these depictions. And so we have a little inside scoop on what's going to come up next. And don't ask me about season 3, but I'm already in there. But so we were in the unique position then, because we had the scripts and we knew what was coming, to do an impact study of the whole first season of The Pit. So and I don't want to get into too much of the details on how we did the study. There's a flyer out there, I think, when you come in, that will give you some information. But we did two things. We surveyed audiences and gauged their learnings and their attitude shifts about a number of things over the season. And then we also interviewed ER docs and healthcare professionals to get their input on how they felt. And the ER docs unanimously said, we felt so seen. Like people now, I mean, one woman said that her husband, she came home from work and her husband said, so you like actually intubate people at work? And she's like, yeah, So it was like people were able to really understand what goes on in an ER. And we even heard things like viewers that had to take their own child to the emergency room for something. It was taking a really long time, and the kid was complaining, and why don't they see us? Why don't they see us? And the parent said, I had watched The Pit, and I told them they're doing the best they can. So there's anecdotal data like that, but also, the quantitative data that we collected around audiences, we saw that particularly, and maybe we'll show a clip. I think you have a clip of the organ donation storyline, so maybe we'll show that and then I'll tell you some of the results. So,
Be right back.
My wife and I decided we're on board with organ donation.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear it. The church supports their decision.
The OPO is sending an ambulance.
I'll be staying with the family.
Thank you for everything.
I wish I could do the surgery here.
Surgical teams are flying in from all over the country to meet Nick at the Center for Organ Recovery.
We have a car and driver waiting so John and Lily can follow right behind the ambulance.
Thank you. So we won't be seeing you again?
If it's all right, I think a lot of us here would like to attend Nick's funeral.
Yeah, of course.
So I should have set that up a little bit, but this was if you haven't seen The Pit, the parents of a young man who dies of an overdose, and then they have to, he's all of 20 or 19 or something, and they have to decide whether to donate his organs to save other people's lives. And the whole, it gives me cold chills just thinking about it now, but there's a whole discussion about it, and at first they're against it, and they really dive into the subject matter. And one of the things we found in our study was that more than 1 in 4 viewers of that particular storyline, and over a third of those who saw the end of life storyline, which is another storyline about 2 siblings that are having to decide whether to disconnect their father from life support, they immediately searched for more information about these topics, like 2 to 3 times more often than non-viewers. So we saw really almost in real time when people were watching that storyline, they were searching how to become an organ donor or signing up to become an organ donor. So the emotion that's in these episodes coupled with the information can really motivate viewers to take action in their own lives.
As I'm not gonna lie, as the mom of a 19-year-old boy, I couldn't watch a lot of that episode because some of them just feel so, but for the grace of God go I, right? A lot of them. So I want to ask you, Jessica, having worked with writers, what is that process like? How do you make sure they don't, I mean, there's real respect that has to go into these storylines. How do you make sure that that gets built into the process and the final outcome?
In my experience, it's been tremendous respect for the experts, for the science, for the stories. And so I'm thinking specifically about the project that we did recently with Grey's Anatomy, where they were very moved by, or just really amazed by the impact of a heat dome event, that something that doesn't sound so scary could be so disastrous, that happened in the Pacific Northwest and caused several deaths. And the impact on hospitals was so dramatic because people in that area had not been, prepared for something like that. And the way in which to respond felt a bit gauche because it involved using body bags to fill with ice to cool bodies down. And so they wanted to tell this story without it being crass or irreverent to both the proper use of body bags, but also the innovative use of body bags for the purpose of cooling bodies that were overheating, especially elderly bodies. And it was incredibly powerful because we talked to them a lot about the way in which it happened in real life. They wanted to be true to the story. They also are trying to be, dramatic because it's a show. But there was a good balance. I have found, at least in my experience, that there was no, well, screw that, we're just going to do it our way anyway and kind of run away from the science. That's never been my experience. And I'm glad to see you shaking your head too in agreement. What was especially interesting too, though, is we did some polling to see what that impact was like. And specifically with the question of, do you want to see these kind of stories of like real life events that have happened in recent history, which the Pit is like perfect on that front, infused in the content that you consume, whether it be political or not, because the Heat Dome event did have a political tone to it because it was about climate change. And it was an overwhelmingly positive response. Yes, we want to see it because for so many people, it was the visual understanding of a climate emergency that made sense for them, because extreme heat just sounds like a really hot day for some people, but it doesn't always click that it can devastate hospitals that are already dealing with other issues that about in an ED, and now all of a sudden there's all these people who are experiencing heat stroke and other emergencies because of the heat.
I mean, I'm just thinking about what's going on in Europe right now, skyrocketing temperatures, and how many people are thinking back to maybe an episode they saw and maybe they're taking better care of themselves or they're being more cautious in some way. Before we get to you, Cindy, Andrea, as someone who, thinks about representing the patients, do you think that, what's the best way to go about this? And how do we've talked about representing the clinicians. How do you represent the people, regular people who are being affected by these things?
Well, I think part of the challenge, especially when we're talking about technical and scientific issues, is stories are really powerful. But how do we, and coming from where I live in the world of privacy and cybersecurity, how do we help patient communities understand what the impact is to them? That's part of what the Light Collective has been doing over the past 8 years in order to build programs to help educate people. And we've really found that the most of the patients who are living through this slow burn of misinformation getting worse and worse on social media, or who are now starting to experience ransomware attacks. How many of you guys know what that is? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. That's going to be another case study, but we have to really break things down in ways that people can understand. How is this going to impact my safety? But also it comes back to trust. We want patients to be able to trust the science. We want patients to be able to trust their physicians. And we want to be able to do that on equal footing that leads with our dignity and respect for the human experience that patients go through. Sometimes some of the scariest and most traumatic things in their life are when they interact with healthcare. And so we have to meet people where they are.
I can't help but think, even just watching that scene, the way that the parents respond, I was like, they're so gracious. They're so respectful to the people in the ER. I don't know if I could keep it together like that. There's something like almost role models in some way for people, like you were saying.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw that whole storyline because you said
I couldn't watch
because they were the mom was really hysterical in the beginning and really against it and was not particularly kind, but throughout the doctors were patient and gracious and just tried to walk them through it. So it is amazing modeling for people to understand. God forbid anybody be in that situation, but to understand the process. And in fact, one of the ER docs that this was a letter actually that Noah Wiley got, a fan letter from an ER doc who said that he had one of those situations where the young person was basically not going to wake up. They were basically brain dead, and they had to make a decision. He had to go in and talk to the family about it and talk about organ donation and all the options. And they're really hard. He said they're very hard conversations to have, and he was sort of, getting himself ready to go in. He walks into the room to talk to the family, and he sits down, and they said, "It's okay, Doc. We watched The Pit. We already know what we want to do."
Wow.
I mean,
that's amazing. So, Cindy, let's talk about this. I mean, even just in that, we just talked about ransomware very briefly. We'll get back to that. But even just in that scene, you see that there's a religious component. The priest is present. You see, like marriage sort of tension going on there. There's so many other things going on beyond, the addiction issue that the victim has, and just the issues that it raises in context. So let's talk about why you and your program have really decided that is something, a collective that you've put together to sort of bring more awareness to that.
Yes, and let me share what we have been working with a group of 10 different organizations, different funders of health research, many of them who American Cancer Society, Komen, Doris Duke Foundation, Robertson Foundation. I will not recite them all. But what we, as I was hearing you all and also viewing these clips is where the science lives in that, right? And we tend to think of innovation, in terms of cures and medicines, right? The new antibody to treat cancer, great advances in pancreatic cancer treatment, which we really need. And there are other forms of science that the innovation, what results from them are a little more invisible. Like if we think of what we just saw, there is a science in figuring out that even in a hectic environment, the care can be safe. How do we make sure it's safe? There are research questions in how do we allocate organ donations? Who receives organ donations? There's a science in how fast do we move people, or the organs that are donated. Thinking of the cause of death, right? What were the risk factors that led to that overdose, to that addiction? And so then we begin to think about what are those other factors that determine or impact our health, right? There's a lot of research that goes into all of that doesn't often get attention. And so we wanted to bring attention to it. And especially because in a time when healthcare, even, for the majority of the population is a struggle, even if we have these cutting edge medicines, we don't all have access to them, right? A lot of the population struggles with chronic illness, with complex chronic diseases, and managing those is also another, many research questions in there. And so we think that to address the issues that the country has currently, as a population, our life is not getting longer, and so we're becoming worse as a nation in terms of health compared to other countries that are our peers. And so we think that science could have a role in informing how do we get the population to a healthier state, right? How do we use science to inform that? And that's what we are talking about, Health Solutions Science Enterprise. We have biomedical science, which informs how do we develop those cures. But we also have this health solution science, which informs all these other questions that will either improve clinical care or will, help inform policies like housing. I was reading yesterday that there is a tool that's been developed through research that can detect the impact or how much being unhoused adds to your risk of cardiovascular disease. So we think that we need more of that, and we need not just more, but we need to figure out how to connect it to the users of that knowledge. Policymakers don't always have that information. We're we think at a very critical moment when science of all kinds, you mentioned, is a climate science that politicized? Well, the reality is heat is having an impact on people, right? And so we need to figure out, well, what do we do about it? And so let me pause there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I definitely want to take questions from the audience. So I'll just ask one more question, then we'll come to you guys. So, it's one show, right? But the idea is like ripple effect. So from each of your perspectives, what would be something that you would be like, man, if we could draw a line from like a story told here to what? Like what would be ideal? I don't know. I'm like more kids want to become doctors, or Jeremy's like, no. what
Well,
is
they
it?
did back in the day. I
Yeah.
mean, the reason that Noah Wiley decided to do this show, because he always said he would never play another doctor because he felt very typecast from ER.
Right.
And during COVID, when we were all locked down and the emergency rooms were overflowing and the mental health of the providers was stressed, he got so many letters from people saying, I became an ER doctor because of watching you on ER. Please, we're dying here. Tell our story. And so he got enough of those letters that he decided, okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to tell the real story. It's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be everybody looking like a supermodel and making out in the broom closet. It's going to be the real deal. And from our research, we learned that the ER physicians that we interviewed said they felt seen, like he's really doing that. But that was the impetus for him to even start that show.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the Gina Davis initiative for getting more women seen on screens in STEM roles. And obviously we're not there yet, but it doesn't seem as it definitely changed things to see women on screens who worked in tech and nobody, made a big deal out of it. I guess I'm wondering, you did mention cybersecurity, which is so hard for people to, we can't touch data, but it brings people an understanding. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I
scene?
started the Light Collective after being afraid of hackers. And then I went to my first DEF CON and I've spoken there 5 times. And I have learned how important hackers for good are at making the internet safer. So ethical hacking, and the other part of it is in healthcare cybersecurity, there are so many amazing stories. So I'm going to give a few statistics. Has anybody heard about the Change breach? Okay, so this was a massive breach that shut down and impacted, according to American Hospital Association, polling 1,000 hospitals, 74% of them had a direct impact on patient care. They were not able to deliver care as fast as they could. There was also the Ascension breach. Let me explain what happens and what was portrayed in the pit in season 2. So basically, a ransomware attack shuts down a hospital's infrastructure and their network. Ransomware attacks are getting faster, bigger, and worse. And when they happen, it can cause a loss of life for that hospital. UC San Diego has a wonderful Center for Healthcare Cybersecurity that has been doing a lot of work to look at, just like if we dropped a bomb on a city, what is the blast radius? And what are the stories of a person having a stroke trying to go into that hospital, and then all of a sudden they cannot get the care as fast enough as they need? Or a breast cancer patient who cannot get her chemotherapy. These stories are, I think, often told kind of in the headlines or in the news without tying back what the impact is to the patients. I think the pit did a great job of that. I think there's a whole cast of characters here of telling what could happen if your medical device, if you have a pacemaker or an insulin pump, and it gets targeted and you could actually have a heart attack and die. These are types of things that an amazing coalition called the Health Sector Coordinating Council has been working to get ahead of, along with hospital CSTOs, health systems, and device companies, so that our healthcare infrastructure is safer. However, we're not getting there fast enough. we've got to tell these stories in a way that really relates to people, that helps change incentives and policy, and helps underwrite, fund, and invest safer cyber infrastructure before attackers get there faster than our ability to defend.
Okay, great. Who has a question? I'm gonna go venture out here. Rotimi, hello.
Hey y'all, I'm Rotimi. I'm an incoming student at Oxford. And when I was in middle school, the show 13 Reasons Why came out. And it was super controversial. Like, some schools banned it, told parents, like, your kids might be watching this, don't let them. And it attempted to tackle a health issue somewhat, suicide. And it was really controversial. And I'm curious, like, what do y'all see as a difference between bringing attention to some of these really sensitive topics and stories in a way that's positive or negative? Like, how do you know how to incentivize the action in the correct direction?
I gotta say that we worked with 13 Reasons Why on season 2, because after season 1, which we told them, and it's very much a common thing in Hollywood, you don't show somebody actually committing the act. You can talk about it, you can, but don't show them actually doing it, because it's incredibly triggering and it can cause other people to do the same. And so that's like a common thing, but they decided, no, we're gonna do this, we're gonna be controversial, and they certainly were. And then the one thing about our organization is we position ourselves as friends. So I'm not gonna go and attack them, because I know there's advocacy groups out there that are gonna go crazy, which they did. And they then came to us season 2 and said, will you help us? And so they actually put together a coalition of advisors for season 2 and beyond. And they put a lot of PSAs around it. I think now if you go back and try to watch that scene, they've cut out that scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they cut it out because of so much pressure. But that's an example of when you don't consult and you just think you can do it for artistic purposes, and then some of the backlash. So anyway.
If I could add on to that, I think every patient community has a different set of needs, a different culture, a different set of trust issues. Even within the broader cancer community, there are subsets of breast cancer, there's subsets of the way that communities have earned or built trust. And I think the way that we see ourselves represented is extremely important, because if we are trying to tell the story of the good or how we can lead change, we have to kind of think differently of how patients are actually part of that story, not just as patients, but as leaders of change, leaders of research, co-creators. And we can be doing that a lot more. There's a ton of rich lived experience in our stories and our cultures.
Thank you. You had a question.
Hi, Dan Gorenstein. I'm founder, executive editor of the health policy news organization Trade-Offs. Question for you, Kate. I'm really curious, what lessons would you say that the pit has learned from season 1 to season 2, now going into season 3, as it pertains to kind of like getting at this more like real stuff? What are they doing now differently than they were before, right?
Ooh, that's probably a better question for them than me. But I think,
they're not here.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a bad proxy for them. But I think that they have this real dedication to telling the truth and showing what really goes on. And also, not just in terms of patients, and all of that, of course, is very important, but also what's going on with the doctors and the healthcare providers and their mental health. And of course, if you watch the show, you see Dr. Robbie's struggle as well as others. And that's a big part of what I think the viewing public is newly being exposed to. I don't think that's been a topic on, and we work on Grey's Anatomy and Chicago Med and all the other medical shows as well. But this one, I think, has really, they have I don't want to call it a mandate, because it's something they really, really want to do, is show the side of the physicians. So I think I don't know if that's changed. I think that's a consistent thing that they're going to continue to do. There's a couple of other issues that I think they touched on in season 1 that they've realized they want to go deeper into in season 2 and season 3. And if you watch season 2, the storyline around Orlando and his inability to pay for his diabetes meds and food for his family, and he had to make a choice, and it put him in the ER because he wasn't taking his medication the way he should be. That storyline is going to continue, not only with him, but we're going to see a lot more around affordability and the social determinants of health, and how it's not always just about your health. It's about where you live. It's about where you work. It's about, the access to healthy food that you have and all of the rest of it. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but
Just a real quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Can you, real quick follow-up here. Do you think that the success of the Pit is influencing other
yes,
shows?
100%.
And how do you know? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
100%. I've had, because again, we work with all the medical shows. We work with other shows as well, with the shrinking and, all kinds of different kids shows, everything. But the medical shows in particular have said, holy crap, we got to up our game because of the Pit. So yes, absolutely. I think it's going to change. And we may see, spin-offs or other. In fact, there's talk about a reality show based on real ERs, and that came from the Pit. So I think, yes, it's affecting everybody in Hollywood.
I would love to, before we go to another question, I would love to hear from you, Jessica, how this relate. One of the things that we are, surrounded by is social media, information, ideas about medical care, science, what's real, what's not real. That's the show I want to watch.
Yeah. It's the show I want to watch too, and I feel like I am watching it. I was thrilled to see that the Pit had infused the dangers of harmful medical information in a few storylines. It was showed in the measles case and how the parents were managing that, and then even got even more complicated with the litigation because of how the kid was treated with the measles that they had. It showed up in the free birth story where the woman wanted to have an unassisted birth and was having preeclampsia and had a absolute obstetric emergency that had to be managed in the only place that it could be managed, in a hospital. They're not skipping the stuff that is happening that is actually influencing health, and I love that. There's enough data and there's enough experience to show that harmful information is influencing health and misinformation is actually killing people. We're seeing that now in data. We were just talking about it earlier today. Kids are hemorrhaging, babies are hemorrhaging now because of refusal for vitamin K injections. There's probably going to be a new hepatitis B chronic disease epidemic in a couple decades because of the refusal for hepatitis B vaccination at birth. There's going to be more kids who get measles and perhaps get SSPE, which is a complication that is rare but can happen 15, 20 years later and is 100% fatal. And I'm thrilled that those stories are being told in that type of context, because unfortunately, when you just hear the statistics from an epidemiologist like me, even if I try to make it visually appealing on social media or engaging through social media, it doesn't land the same way as watching a kid experience an emergency that is entirely preventable, or watching a woman who seems healthy and is very close to term have something where she has to have a horrifying, on-site C-section to try and rescue her and the baby.
And who else has a question? Here we go. Keep going here. Go you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Heritage. I'm the exec at American Brain Foundation. We raise money for and fund brain research. One of the things we are really working hard on is to try to get members of the general public to get interested in funding medical research. And to a lesser extent, trying to understand the massive hole that will last for decades that is currently being punched in our scientific progress. But as we know, maybe we did, but nobody else woke up today and thought, I want to fund medical research. It's pretty esoteric. And what we also know is it's not like the Pit where you intubate or you get a C-section or you save. Generally, we are building upon the shoulders of others, and you're standing on thousands and thousands of other scientists' work. And then at the very end, there might be a cure, a new treatment, a new device. And so it's difficult because you can't say to a donor, if you invest in this, we're going to cure breast cancer, or we're going to find, why people get dementia and Alzheimer's. So I am asking you, these amazing storytellers that you are, what are some ideas about getting John Q. Public to wake up and think, I could have an impact if I got involved with helping to fund research?
I mean, if I can shout out Rotini right now, who works with Dr. Francis Collins, who mentioned this today. He has an organization called Discovery Lives in Us, which is essentially to do storytelling, to bring those experiences home, to say that a specific NIH study, whether it was a clinical trial or results from an NIH study that was completed, saved a person's life, a person who could be your neighbor, a person who could be your family member. So I think we need thousands more of those types of stories, because it really is going to be the power of storytelling to change a person's mind to wake up one day and say, you know what if I could be a part of saving my neighbor's life because of the research that is unfunded right now.
I'll say that we have a grant from Keck Medical to work with storytellers to do more stories around medical research, to help diversify medical research as well as build trust with medical research, because we know certain populations have less trust in clinical trials and so forth. So from our standpoint, and we're just storytelling, but to work with the Pit, to work with Grey's Anatomy. We actually have worked with Grey's Anatomy over the last couple seasons on an Alzheimer's research storyline, and she loses her funding because the government cuts the funding, and so we're trying to get those kinds of stories told to build more trust and understanding in the general public about what medical research really means.
I'd love to. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cindy.
I just wanted to add on to what doesn't work and what does from the perspective of patient communities. So I would say that it is often kind of the approach to have like a big marketing campaign. We see we do want to have celebrities telling these stories of science, but really what resonates with us most is seeing ourselves, the patients and leaders who have represented our communities, who have co-authored in medical journals, who have led the research on equal footing and scaled the learning curve for science. We trust these people who have this shared identity, recognizing that a lot of patient advocacy organizations have had to cobble together their own solutions with bubble gum and tape without the institutional support of the NIH or other, big funders. And we did it because we recognized unmet needs in our communities. So I think we need to tap into that more and do it in an authentic way that isn't just, and due respect to all the scientists and Hollywood, isn't just kind of the ivory tower or, the actors talking to us. We have to authentically represent the people who have lived through what the communities have lived.
Can I just add? That's completely agree with you. I would say yes, it is hard to fundraise for medical research. And this year, last year we were facing a potential cut of 40% to the NIH. This year there's a little increase. But did you know that the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality is on the chopping block, right? And who is advocating for that? And there are people advocating it. But I'll call on Dan, or maybe you probably know about health services research that helps us how to make hospitals safer, how to make care more similar across hospitals, that kind of thing, and the difficulties of sharing those stories, because those are the stories that you tell, and who needs to know?
Who needs to know these stories? Who needs to hear these stories? I mean, the people who I think need to hear these stories are the decision makers, right? It's the policy makers, it's industry executives, it's the people who are in positions of power that really can move the needle and change this, and to be able to understand ultimately the stakes. And I think it's very interesting one of the reasons why I started this nonprofit health policy news organization called Trade-Offs is because the decision makers often lack the information and they need the stories too, even though they're the ones making the decisions. And so how do you help them, get it? And I think it really is, it's so easy. Everything in healthcare is so complicated and everybody knows that and understands that. But ultimately, if you can present these stories, whether it's through the pit or it's the work that you're doing or it's the work that I'm doing, trying to get the stories out so people can begin to intellectually hold the ideas and emotionally feel the things. Like how many of us were crying when we saw that scene, right? And so how can we do more of that work? I think we need to like flood the zone with more and more information that captures these stories that are grounded though in research and data and the real experiences.
Do you want to add to that, Jeremy?
Yes, I think that the pit is doing something that I'm so grateful for, which is that it tells a truth that I am legally unable to tell because of HIPAA and medical privacy, and that's appropriate. And I can do a half hour on that. But science is harder because of this sort of 15, 20-year gap between the pipette and the infusion, where you're actually getting this. And I think that one way I've seen progress here is to actually highlight the scientists themselves. And so when it comes to disease and treatment, we can center the patients, we can center even the healthcare workers, and that's what the pit, I think, does. But it's hard to say, oh, they're not gonna have Dr. Robbie say, and I'm really glad that I could save your life today because of this Nobel Prize winning research from 20 years ago. It just doesn't work, right? They're too good at writing TV to ever do something that, heavy-handed. But if you look online, if you look at like some of the people that we follow and we interact with, a lot of these scientists are now on social media and they're telling their stories to say, hey, I'm a PhD at UPenn, I'm studying chronic pain, look at my story. And then when someone says, oh, they're gonna cut research because all these researchers are just, they're shills or they're punching in, they're government workers who don't really care, they're just sort of bureaucrats. They say, no, I know Lindsay, she's like a super passionate, brilliant person. And so I think that the scientists are beginning to tell their own stories. And so I think, people with platforms can help amplify that. I think that's really important.
And that's actually part of the discovery lives in us too. And it just came up today early in our panel where the point is to also connect the person who experienced the intervention and the scientist who was probably doing the pipetting in the most early clinical trials or the preclinical research that led to the clinical trial. So to connect those two to show the full life cycle of an idea to a solution to it actually saving a life really is incredible storytelling. Yeah, and then also the third piece of this is the actual federal health workforce, which has been absolutely attacked in the past year and a half. And again, with this really quite absurd idea that these individuals are somehow just bureaucrats who punch in, punch out, and do the bare minimum. That could not be further from the truth. I know so many people at the FDA who we are so lucky to have. The FDA recruited them out of industry and they could make far more money outside. And the very best ones are the ones who actually leave now because they're so in demand. And so it's actually ironic that the very people that are being attacked are often just the opposite of how they're portrayed. They're actually working overtime, off hours, because they actually believe in public health and science. And then for them to be attacked by their new leadership is moral injury, really. And so I think we also, in some of the work that I've done in the past year, is to try to just humanize these humans and let them have a place to talk. A lot of times, some are very brave. Liz Genexi is like so brave just to go out there and talk about her experience in HHS, but so many of them are afraid. And so I'm very frequently quoting them without naming them, just to give them a way to be heard.
I'd love to add one more tool to the toolbox, if I may. So the way that I've been working in public media is instead of just bringing the story to listeners, asking them to be the story. So proposing a question that we don't know the answer to. For this one, it was about movement interventions and how that affects people's screen time and their sense of well-being, their ability to concentrate, in addition to chronic health conditions. And, we had 23,000 people sign up who wanted to be part of a clinical trial. And I just wrote an op-ed for Stat News that came out yesterday saying, like, if you one way I think of building back trust in science is to bring people in so they understand the actual process. Like, what is a hypothesis? How does the biology work? What are we testing for? And my favorite thing was the teachers who used our projects in their classrooms to explain data collection, to explain, how do you run a clinical trial? What's a placebo effect? How are we measuring ourselves? This is a self-surveying study. What does that mean? And then, I hope, it took 3 years to get it published, but the study was published on Tuesday. I hope they can be like, y'all were part of this, high school students, you are part of this. So that's just one more tool I would love to add.
I was just going to say that there have been a number of producers that have come to me because we were funded by CDC up until 2017. And we're no longer funded by CDC, just put it that way. But when we were, I had a number of producers come over the years and say, we want to do a show about the CDC, about the people working in the CDC.
Sexy.
And yeah. And CDC, never would go for it. They turned it down. But there has been interest in telling those stories. It's just a matter of
that would be a great show, like The Office, but public health.
Right. I
Totally.
would love that. Let's get together. We'll make a pitch.
I want to make sure we get to this question right here. Please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. My name is Charisse Harris, and I oversee communications and storytelling at a philanthropic organization based in Denver. The organization works to transform systems and build wealth for Colorado kids and families. And I'm curious, for any of you really, how you have seen the narratives that have played out in these places be extended beyond a single episode, season, or even a show. Because I think we know that for people to resonate, understand, and then want to do something about what they've seen, they have to be exposed to a narrative or a message 30 times and in multiple different places. So I'm curious what you all have seen and how that has worked.
Well, repetition is great which is why we work most primarily with television, because you're seeing those characters over and over again, and you have a chance to really take a story, down the road instead of the very special episode where you get one episode and everything's tied up in a bow at the end. So yes, but absolutely, it's got to be more than that. And the examples that I think we were talking about before, like the Will and Grace and Modern Family, those shows were very far apart, and there were many shows in between, but brought people into people's living rooms that they wouldn't normally be exposed to, and it eventually affected marriage equality policy. But that was a number of shows, a number of characters, a number of storylines that all had to do with...
It adds up.
Yeah, it totally adds up. So that's just one example. I have many more, but I'll stop talking.
I think there's one big tool in the war chest that we haven't talked about, which is how tech companies are a part of what is being fed to patient communities. And I'm going to start with a very quick story of, in 2022, 10 of our patient advocates downloaded our data from Facebook, and we started looking at how companies were tracking us across the internet, but also some health systems. And we started building upon the research. We started working with experts in cybersecurity and some of the scientists who were trying to support us, because we were trying to figure out what was going on. All we saw were the ads, the snake oil, the misinformation that was coming at us. And it turns out a lot of the ad tech that is built to, let's say, if you like a dress on the internet, it's going to feed you that dress over and over again, or dresses like it, and other lookalike audiences. Well, in health, we have those digital footprints too. And there's no governance or protection for the patient communities who are getting fed and blasted this information without accountability. So I think there needs to be a very different conversation if this were to be done well. It would look like telling and amplifying the doctors, the scientific stories, and the good kind of knowledge that patients need. And it would be a lot more of translating what's behind paywalls in academic journals in terms that patients can understand, because we feel so far left behind while we are still like trying to make sense of things by just finding knowledge with each other and trying to survive.
Do you want to jump on there?
Yes, I had a realization when you were talking just now that I want to share with everybody, which is that I know there is a ton of medical misinformation constantly on the internet, but I never see it in my feeds. The algorithm has figured me out that I'm not interested. And isn't that interesting? And I would like to know why. And sometimes we ask a question like, why do epidemics occur? And I wrote this op-ed that's unpublished, if anyone wants to publish it, saying we need to study why epidemics don't happen more often. Like the odds should tell us they should happen all the time. And so sometimes the inverse question, so why is the algorithm not feeding me garbage? Maybe has something to teach us.
Well, I would love to talk more about this, because the fallout from that story was Markup had a follow-up investigation where they looked at 30 of the top 100 hospitals in US News and World Reports. 30 of the top 100 were taking data from authenticated patient portals and passing it back to social media companies. And then there was a wave of federal and state class actions lawsuits that got challenged by the American Hospital Association. So when we think about these deeply technical concepts, this is the type of thing where everybody's like, oh my God, I didn't know that happens. And we blame the patients. We say, why are the patients so stupid? While at the same time, it has become a very adversarial environment on the internet. I highly recommend a book from Cory Doctorow. It's called Inshitification. And it's how tech platforms have been designed around us. And we, the patients, that was a track at at Ideas this week. We have all these things we want to be able to surface, to talk to journalists and storytellers, and we can't get the story out and help people connect the dots.
I'm just interested, I'm not mad at my algorithm at all. Like my algorithm seems to know me. Apparently I like to watch planes land. There's like a whole plane landing thing, right?
Yeah,
and then it serves me that. And it also serves me, and then I love when this happens, it serves videos of me talking about the pit. And I'm like,
That's hilarious. You're like, good job, me. I want to be mindful of the time. I don't want to take your whole afternoon. I think the panelists are going to stick around a little bit, but I do want to end with you, Cindy. I want to thank the Doris Duke Foundation for bringing us together for this fascinating conversation.
Thanks for being here.
And I just want to ask, what are you looking at next?
Well, we're trying to get more folks excited about health solution science, because it is a critical time, as I mentioned. I would love us to start asking that question. Are we funding enough of it? Are we advocating it? And we as a country didn't think twice of creating drugs is a hard endeavor. Yet we do it, right? We put in funding at those, not knowing if the experiment is going to work. So how do we build that complement of health solution science enterprise? It will take everybody, right? It'll take many actors. So yeah, it's a start.
Thank you so much to our panelists and the Impact Lounge. Thank you for being here. This was such a great, cozy, intense conversation. I loved it. I live for this as a moderator. So thank you.
Thank you,
Big round of applause.